Discover the incredible, untold stories of a Wild West sheriff. Transformative moments revealed. Sheriff Jonah McCall stood under the brutal sun, a heavy weight of expectation resting on his broad shoulders. Each morning, he greeted the townsfolk of Silver Creek with a nod, their unease palpable. They depended on him, a steady guardian in a world where morality often bent under the pressure of greed. But as the relentless wind distorted the landscape, a nagging uncertainty began to tangle itself in Jonah's mind. Mr. Thorne, the land baron poisoning his town with exploitation, loomed larger by the day. Should he uphold the law that he had sworn to protect, or should he twist it to stave off Thorne's ruthless intentions? Internal conflict slithered through Jonah like poison, coiling tightly around his resolve. His father's lessons echoed through his mind. Where did loyalty to the law end and loyalty to the people begin? Could he watch helplessly as Thorne's ambitions crush the very spirit of Silver Creek? Or should he risk his own reputation and perhaps even his freedom to shield the innocents? Each thought ignited in him a fierce desperation that kept him awake long into the night. The shadow of despair loomed, suffocating his sense of duty as he wrestled with the gnawing doubt. As a storm screamed through the valley one night, Jonah sought the sanctuary of the old family barn. The chaos outside matched the turmoil inside him. It was there, among the dust and memories, he stumbled upon an antique revolver, its handle warm in his grip. The artifact wasn't just wood and metal. It whispered of a lineage that fought for justice. The thrill coursed through him, a call to arms against the legacy of greed that Thorne stood for. But the deeper he grappled with the emotional grip of the revolver, the more he felt his heart churn with fear. Had his family fought for this land only to see it corrupted? He clenched the weapon tighter, its weight provoking a reckoning within him. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Jonah sought guidance from retired Sheriff Hank Riggins, hoping to unravel the tangled web of Silver Creek's past. As they sifted through forgotten letters and documents, Jonah's heart raced at revelations that shook him to his core. Connections hid dark secrets, illuminating just how intertwined his family's legacy was with Thorne's creeping dominance. Each discovery ignited a flicker of determination, yet a gnawing anxiety crept in. What if this truth set off a chain reaction that would turn the townsfolk against him? The pressure mounted as Thorne's influence tightened like a noose around Jonah's neck. He knew confronting the land baron was inevitable, yet the thought of wearing the badge in the company of those who now viewed him as a possible traitor sent ice through his veins. Would he find the courage to restore honor to the town he loved, or be forever marked as just another fool chasing an impossible dream? Just beyond the horizon, fate awaited, and Jonah felt its dark whisper, calling him to a confrontation he couldn't escape. One question echoed louder than anything. Could he rise for justice when his own people might turn their backs on him? The storm raged, both outside and within, as the showdown loomed ever closer. The dawn light broke stubbornly through the thick clouds, casting a pallid glow over Silver Creek. Jonah stood at the edge of town, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun, a dark mirror of the uncertainties brewing in his heart. Today was the day he would confront Thorne, the man who threatened everything Jonah held dear. The air buzzed with an electric tension that hinted at the storm of conflict ahead. His father's revolver hung heavy at his side, a constant reminder of the legacy he bore. It felt more than just a weapon, it felt like a choice. Every click of its trigger was a choice toward action or inaction, toward preserving the law or bending it for the sake of a few. Jonah's father had always taught him that the law was as much about justice as it was about order. Yet here he stood on the precipice of deciding which path to take, with eyes watching, expecting, and maybe judging. With each step toward Thorne's sprawling estate, doubt clawed at him. He rehearsed his words, sharpened his resolve. There was a point when he questioned if he was an upholder of the law or merely a terrified man trying to save his reputation. Would confronting Thorne signal to the townsfolk that he had chosen the side of justice, even at the risk of losing everything? As he approached, the sprawling property loomed larger, a fortress of power that seemed untouchable. The people of Silver Creek had long believed in its invincibility, allowing Thorne's suffocating grip to tighten around their lives. But now, fueled by the uncovering of dark truth and his father's lessons ringing in his ears, Jonah felt the rush of determination coursing through him like wildfire. The meeting was to take place in Thorne's office, a lavishly adorned room festooned with trophies of conquest and wealth. Jonah couldn't ignore the irony. Here, within these walls, opulence masked ruthless exploitation. The very problems that plagued Silver Creek were birthed from the comforts of this space. He's confronted by Thorne's smug demeanor, the man's arrogance filtering through every word. "Ah, Sheriff McCall, finally decided to join us," Thorne sneered, leaning back in his chair. "I hear you've been stirring up trouble. What is it you want, exactly? A pat on the back for challenging the natural order?" Jonah clenched his fists, feeling the revolver's weight pressing against him. "The natural order? You mean the order in which you exploit our people and our land? That's not natural. It's crime disguised as business." His voice trembled, each syllable a stepping stone over deep waters. Thorne raised an eyebrow, amusement mingling with menace. "You're playing a dangerous game, Sheriff. The law can be twisted, just like the sentiments of the townsfolk. If you push them too hard, they might just turn against you." The words struck a nerve, rattling his resolve. But deep down, Jonah felt an awakening. He had spent too long bending under threats. It was time to carve his own path, even if it meant standing alone. Time seemed to stretch, each heartbeat echoing in Jonah's ears as he stood in confrontation. He realized then that the fear no longer consumed him. Instead, anger ignited purpose. They would either learn to respect the law or face its consequences. In that charged moment, Jonah resolved not just to fight for the town, but to embody the very principles he swore to uphold. The confrontation was only the beginning. Suddenly, a new thought crept in, one that could flip the power dynamics in Silver Creek. As Jonah's determination solidified, a plan formed in his mind. A strategic confrontation that could reveal Thorne's true nature to the townsfolk. He understood that his true battle was not just with Thorne, it was with the very perception of justice in Silver Creek. What would come next could either redeem him or ruin him completely. He looked into Thorne's eyes, ready to declare, ready to fight. All he needed was the right moment. The stakes were rising, and Jonah felt it all too clearly. The weight of the badge pressing not just against his chest, but against every choice he was about to make. And as he turned to leave, the threat of betrayal loomed at his back, lingering like a ghost. Could he trust the very ones he fought for? The answer awaited him in the hearts of Silver Creek's people, where loyalty could fracture or hold firm. The time was closing in. How far would he go to reclaim justice for Silver Creek? Jonah stepped out of Thorne's office, the door thudding shut behind him. But the oppressive weight of the confrontation lingered like a storm cloud overhead. Each stride he took away from that opulent prison felt both liberating and suffocating. Anger fueled him, a newfound fire blazing within. He was no longer just a sheriff, a simple enforcer of the law. He was a man standing at the crossroads of morality and duty. As Jonah walked the familiar streets of Silver Creek, the voices of his townsfolk echoed in his mind. He could hear their laughter, their fears, and their whispered conversations about Thorne's menacing influence. What revelation could tear them from their complacent acceptance? He had to find a way to make them see, not just hear. They needed to understand the stakes, and for that, he would have to risk everything. Returning to his office felt both like sanctuary and jail. The walls had seen too many decisions tempered by fear and too much compromise. He rifled through his papers, desperate to pen a plan to expose Thorne's manipulation. The darker truths must be revealed, but how? The sheriff's badge was just metal. It wouldn't shelter him in the storm brewing against the invisible hand that Thorne controlled. Suddenly, a flicker of inspiration crossed his mind. What if he could devise a way to gather evidence of Thorne's corrupt dealings? He had recently heard talk of Thorne's operations from some of the more marginalized townsfolk, those affected by the very exploitation that Jonah now understood as a cancer in their community. Engaging them could draw out the truth and rally the townspeople against the sinister grip Thorne had on their lives. As Jonah paced his cramped office, shadows lengthening with the sinking sun, he questioned his own skills. His father had trained him to be a man of action, but what about cunning? What about strategy? He had abilities lying dormant, honed during his time in law enforcement, but never fully realized until now. The resolve to learn shone in him like a beacon in the quintessential fog of his doubts. He recalled the stories of his father confronting crooks with not just fists, but wit. Jonah needed to transform, to become more than just law enforcement. He must embody a strategist. It meant leaving behind notions of straightforward justice for a more indirect approach. Time to engage not only the town, but also the darker underbelly of Thorne's empire. After surveying maps of Silver Creek in frustration, Jonah stumbled upon a lead, a whispered tale of illegal deals taking place at the outskirts of town. If he could discreetly gather information on the transactions, perhaps he could turn the tide. But who could he trust? The townsfolk needed unity, yet they were also caught in a web of fear tighter than the noose Thorne had around their hearts. Would he risk approaching David, the local blacksmith, who had seen too much yet kept quiet for far too long? David had children to protect, living in a shadow since Thorne began tightening his grip. Would Jonah's call for justice be met with solidarity or fear? With his resolve crystallized, Jonah took a deep breath, remembering the weight of the badge on his chest. This journey demanded more than courage. It required ingenuity. He must step into the shadows and navigate with care, all while seeking the clarity to illuminate the truth for Silver Creek. He gripped the revolver again, feeling its heavy promise of protection and authority. Jonah was ready to take the risk, but the stakes grew steep. If he stepped too far out of bounds, he could fracture whatever fragile trust remained. As he set out again, a chilling thought crossed his mind. What if Thorne was already one step ahead? The sound of hooves echoed in the distance, an omen or a chance at discovery. But Jonah felt a sudden urgency rise within him. The time had come to face the darkness, deeper than he ever imagined. With his resolve forged anew, he took one last look at the setting sun, not just as an end of the day, but as a beginning, What awaited him in their shadows may reveal more than he bargained for. The confrontation with Thorne was imminent. The battle for justice had only just begun. Jonah moved swiftly, each step becoming a cautious dance between determination and doubt. The streets of Silver Creek held whispers of trepidation, a town both familiar and alien, shrouded in the tension that resonated from Thorne's looming presence. As he approached David's blacksmith shop, Jonah's heart thudded in his chest, not just from the weight of his mission, but from the fear of rejection. David had always been an anchor in Jonah's life, steadfast, reliable, but also ensnared in a life tempered by survival. Would the blacksmith's loyalty extend to supporting Jonah's burgeoning resolve, or would the weight of fear snuff out their potential alliance? With each step, he mentally rehearsed his arguments, the truths he hoped would open the man's eyes. The forge was still, the usual sounds of clanging metal replaced by an eerie silence. The air smelled of coal and sweat, filled with memories of both camaraderie and compromise. Jonah knew this man had the strength of the mountains, yet felt the immovable pressure of the world above him. "David!" Jonah's voice broke the stillness. The stout figure of the blacksmith emerged from the shadows, his brow furrowing in confusion, quickly shifting to concern. "Sheriff, what brings you here?" Jonah met his gaze, willing himself to forego the hesitation that threatened to seep in. "I need to talk to you. It's about Thorne." David's jaw tightened, his gaze flicking sideways, as if the very mention of Thorne could summon calamity. "You know it's dangerous to speak of him. You shouldn't be here, Jonah." "I know the risk, but it's not just about me, David. It's about all of us. Thorne is ruining this town. He's the cancer dragging us down, feeding on our fear. We need to stand up." "Stand up?" David scoffed quietly, his voice low, laced with years of self-preservation. "He has eyes everywhere. You think we can take him on?" There it was, the hesitation that Jonah feared. He felt the creeping isolation clawing at him, yet he pressed on. "By keeping silent, you're giving him power. The way I see it, speaking out could save our lives, or at the very least our future." David crossed his arms, his fingers twitching in agitation. "It isn't that simple. You have a duty as sheriff, but what about the rest of us? We're tangled in this web, Jonah. You can't expect us to just fight." Each word was strategically slashing through Jonah's resolve, parrying the hope he had as a child, playing in the smithy, a dream untainted. "I'm not asking for everyone to charge at Thorne's front door. I need information, what you've seen, what you know. If we gather enough evidence quietly, it could bring him down, for good." The blacksmith's expression softened slightly, revealing a flicker of consideration, but still lingering resistance. "And if he finds out, what will happen then?" Jonah took a deep breath, the truth stinging in his throat. "Then we must be prepared to face him. We can't hide any longer, not if we want our lives, our town back." For a brief moment, silence enveloped them, filled with the weight of their shared past and the uncertain future. Jonah's heart raced, the battle between indifference and courage playing out on David's weathered face. Finally, David sighed, looking resigned, yet something began to shift behind his rugged exterior. "If you're going down this path, you need to be smart about it. I know more than I've let on. I'll help you, but we tread carefully. We're not just dealing with corruption, but a monster." Jonah felt a rush of relief, a spark igniting hope within him. Yet, as they began discussing the details, the looming shadow of Thorne felt closer than ever. He would need to call upon not just David's strength, but every ounce of his own. What if Thorne was listening right now, waiting to lash out? The urgency felt palpable, and Jonah knew every decision he made from this point on would shape the fate of Silver Creek. As he left the smithy, adrenaline coursed through him, revealing a sharp clarity that had been absent until now. The tide was shifting. No longer just an executioner of law, Jonah poised himself to become something that his father had hoped to be, a true protector. But the imminent storm was approaching, and Jonah steeled himself for the battle ahead. On the brink of a breakout decision, Jonah felt a gnawing realization. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous the truth became. He couldn't predict the consequences of this alliance. It could lead to salvation or annihilation. Whatever lay ahead could change everything. Would he be ready to confront not just Thorne, but himself as well? Jonah stepped onto the cobbled pathway, David's words echoing in his mind like the ring of a hammer striking hot steel. The gravity of their conversation wrapped around him as tightly as the leather straps on his holster. Every step away from the forge was laden with the weight of purpose, but it was also punctuated by a growing sense of dread. He was stepping into unknown territory, no longer just the sheriff of Silver Creek, but a man on the cusp of something larger than himself. As twilight began to blanket the town, Jonah turned into an alley that led him to a deserted corner behind the saloon, a place where secrets were often traded in hushed tones. He leaned against the rough wooden wall, inhaling deeply, trying to collect his scattered thoughts. This wasn't just about taking down Thorne, it was about reclaiming his own identity. Shadowed by his father's legacy and the expectations that came with it, Jonah felt the stirrings of a different kind of man within himself, a fierce protector, resilient and willing to fight against the corruption that had seeped into the roots of Silver Creek. The cool evening air hastened his resolve, and with every breath he recalled the stories from townsfolk about Thorne's ruthless grip, accounts of intimidation, extortion, and the dread that hung thick over those who dared to voice dissent. Homegrown fear had spread through the town like a contagion, stifling hope. Yet here he was, a singular point of defiance amidst the churn. He would not allow the shadows to swallow him whole. Information, he mumbled to himself as he paced. David had placed the key in his hands, but that key would remain useless without a door to fit it. I need to know who's with me. Jonah ran his hand across the wooden wall, pondering how many others might share his vision. How could he connect with them without exposing their intentions to the very man he sought to dismantle? Just then, he spotted two silhouettes emerging from the main street, voices mingling in a blend of gossip and laughter. Jonah instinctively slipped further into the shadows, pressing against the wall, drawn by the familiar tones. They were Mary, a longtime waitress at the saloon, and Jacob, a miner known for his stubbornness and unwavering spirit. Despite the odds, they were two of the town's few remaining beacons of hope. "Did you hear? Jonah's been poking around again," Jacob said, laughter laced with skepticism. "What does he think he can do? Thorne isn't one to mess with." "I don't know, Jacob," Mary replied, her voice wavering. "But he's got that fire in his eyes. Maybe he's finally ready to do something about Thorne. We all need someone to stand for us." Those words struck Jonah like a thunderclap. Could it be? Did they sense the shift in him? In the dim light, Jonah marveled at the strength of their spirit despite the crushing weight of despair. Did he dare reveal himself? Could he gather their courage along with his own? Torn between action and apprehension, Jonah edged out of the shadows, calling out softly, "Mary, Jacob." Their startled expressions quickly morphed into cautious recognition. "Jonah?" Jacob's voice was a mix of surprise and a lingering disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "Listening," he answered, feeling the charge of realization illuminate his strong yet hesitant frame. "Can we talk?" As they settled on the low wooden crates littering the alley, Jonah shared David's insights, the threat of Thorne, and his vision for the town. He found himself painting a picture with his words, each brushstroke vibrant and sharp with potential. The atmosphere crackled with transformation, and as he spoke, he recognized his own burgeoning leadership. Yet uncertainty hovered, weaving through the narrative he was constructing. What if he failed to rally them? What if resistance led to bloodshed? As the trio conversed, Jonah felt the weight of their expectations resting heavily on his shoulders. The moment echoed in his thoughts. He was not just asking them to join him, he was potentially endangering their lives. In this dangerous game of defiance, each word, each plan would hold life or death stakes. "I believe we can bring him down," he declared, the words tumbling from his mouth with new fervor. "But I need your support. We must act wisely." The decision lingered in the air, potentially the turning point of their fates. As they prepared to discuss their next steps, a shadow flitted past the entrance of the alley. Jonah's heart raced. The specter of Thorne loomed larger than ever. Would his small spark of revolution ignite a fire, or would it be snuffed out before it ever had a chance to burn? The answers lay ahead like a treacherous path winding through uncertainty. The next move was critical. "Then let's make our moves, quietly but decisively," Jonah said, determination flooding his voice. But in that moment of unity, an unsettling question sank deep within him. Had he already stepped into a web of danger too vast to escape? Would Thorne emerge, ready to grasp any thread of dissent and crush it with ruthless finality? As the trio gathered their resolve, Jonah felt an urgency press against his chest, weighing down on him as surely as any rickety gallows. The reality of their endeavor unfurled before him, a vast tapestry stitched with threads of courage and trepidation. Each decision they made would not only carve paths for their futures, but also entwine their lives in unavoidable ways. "First, we need information. What do we know about Thorne's operations?" Jonah inquired, his tone sharper now, driven by the need to pivot from uncertainty to action. The fragility that had clung to him moments before was beginning to harden into determination. Mary leaned in, her voice a whisper that felt heavy with significance. "I've heard whispers from the miners. Thorne's gang is starting to place pressure on businesses, demanding payments for protection. Rumor has it he's got a stash somewhere, a cache of weapons that could turn the tide." Jacob's brow creased in thought, his optimism tempered by caution when he spoke. "And what do we do with that? Risking ourselves for information is one thing, doing something about it is another." His eyes ranged from Jonah to Mary, searching for a glimmer of assurance. "The miners are scared, Jacob," Jonah interjected, the fire within him igniting further. "If we don't act, this town will become nothing but a ghost of what it once was. We have to muster the courage to take this first step, not just for ourselves, but for everyone too paralyzed with fear to stand up." Their conversation shifted from concerns to strategies, maps and images painted with words amidst the darkness of the alley. Jonah felt invigorated by their energy as ideas began to flow, the kindling of rebellion illuminating the corners where shadows had previously reigned. Hours passed, and Jonah could feel the weight of impending action coiling around his heart. He spoke fervently about gathering support, enlisting the silent majority that had given way to apathy. "I'll talk to the businesses, those who have suffered Thorne's oppression. If we can show them that we can push back, they might find their voices again." As he spoke, the initial flicker of self-doubt began to quiet. It was an unfamiliar sensation, one that felt right, like the reassuring grip of his revolver, ready to protect what he cherished. The plan solidified, and Jonah found himself transitioning into a role he never expected to play, a leader, forging a path against the currents of despair. Yet, in the depths of his psyche, an unsettling realization dawned. Leadership was not synonymous with invulnerability. He could sense the complications of choice weighing heavily on every calculated step forward. And as they prepared to disperse and make individual plans, the backdrop of their meeting cast its long shadow over their lives. Jonah understood clearly now. The journey he was embarking upon would challenge not just his authority as sheriff, but his very sense of self. Stepping out from the alley, the night felt colder, the air thick with the scent of rain. Jonah could feel his heart beating with synchronized intensity with the pace of his feet. He was no longer the boy under his father's shadow. He was a man ready to carve his identity through action. As he turned down the main street, the lights from the saloon flickered invitingly, but their warmth felt distant, both comforting and threatening. Would he emerge victorious, or be torn asunder by the very fabric of the lives he sought to protect? His thoughts were interrupted by the sight of a figure lurking at the end of the street, a man dressed in dark clothing, his face obscured. The moment hung charged with implication as Jonah's instincts surged into overdrive. Was this friend or foe? Either way, the stakes were escalating, and he needed to be prepared to confront this development face on. Here it comes, Jonah thought, a mix of dread and resolve coiling within him. The time had come to face the truth of his journey. Jonah squared his shoulders, the weight of the figure in the distance pulling at his resolve. He could make out the man's stance, guarded yet relaxed, as if waiting for something to unfold. Was he merely a passer-by, or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? The darkness that enveloped the street mirrored the uncertainty filling Jonah's chest. Time seemed to stretch as he approached the mysterious figure, each step reverberating with the thrum of his heartbeat. What if this was an ally, someone who could lend strength to his burgeoning cause? Or worse, what if it was a scout for Thorne, come to sniff out the embers of rebellion? He had to remain vigilant. The integrity of his mission depended on it. "What do you want?" Jonah called out, his voice steadier than he felt. The figure turned slightly, revealing a glint of something silver in the darkness, a badge perhaps. "Just keeping an eye on the night," came the reply, laced with an unforced serenity. The man stepped closer, his face partially illuminated by the flickering street lamps. Jonah recognized him. It was Carter, a former deputy who had left under a cloud of uncertainty. "What are you doing out here, Carter?" Jonah couldn't mask the skepticism in his voice. The former deputy had a reputation for skimming the line between law and chaos, a man whose morals often swayed like the wind. Carter shrugged, a half smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Heard some interesting talk around town, Jonah. Seems like you're stirring the pot. Thought I'd see how hot it's getting." The tension escalated. Jonah hesitated, uncertain whether to trust Carter. Yet there was something compelling about the man, a spark of insight that sometimes accompanied shadows. "I need it to get hotter," Jonah stated resolutely, his expression hardening. "Thorne's grip tightens by the day, and if I'm going to save this town, I need all the information I can get." Carter studied him, the smile fading as seriousness settled over his features. "You're treaded dangerous ground. You think rallying the townsfolk against him will change anything? Fear runs deep. You start getting people to speak up, and Thorne will retaliate. Ever heard of irreversible consequences?" Jonah felt a flicker of annoyance mingled with unease. "I don't have the luxury of standing by. You're in a position to help, Carter. You know things about how Thorne operates. This isn't just about me anymore." The former deputy leaned closer, lowering his voice. "And what about you? What are you willing to risk? Your reputation? Your safety?" Do you think you can emerge unscathed after this? Each question pierced through Jonah's armor of determination, forcing him to confront the cost of leadership. He inhaled deeply, wrestling with the tightness in his throat. Removing Thorne's influence wasn't just important, it felt vital to reclaiming his own identity, long dulled by fear and expectation. It's not just about my safety, it's the whole town. For a moment, silence reigned. The winds whispered the consequences of ambition, laden with doubt and courage in equal measure. Jonah's choices shimmered like fragile glass underfoot. One misstep, and everything he fought for could shatter. "Call it a revival, then," Carter replied, lifting an eyebrow, as if testing Jonah's resolve. "If I help, you'd better be ready for the storm that follows." Jonah's heart raced, the prospect of alliance bringing a new kind of burden. "I'm ready," he asserted, straining against the impending weight of responsibility that loomed over him. "Then let's make some noise," Carter said, a flip of audacity igniting in his eyes. With those words, Jonah felt something shift within him. The impassiveness that had quelled his fire began to blaze anew as they forged an uneasy pact, a collaboration heavy with uncertainty, yet ripe with potential. But as they turned to strategize, a creeping realization settled in Jonah's gut. They were not merely fighting for the town, they were also wrestling with the shadows of their own pasts. What personal demons would emerge from the chaos to threaten their resolve? And just then, from the depths of his fading recollection, a whisper arose. Jonah clenched his fists, determined to silence the past and emerge victorious. The journey would demand more than he had accounted for, but he was ready to uncover the truth that lay buried beneath the layers of fear and doubt. If he could only face what had been hidden away for too long. As they delved into plans, Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that the real confrontation loomed just ahead, waiting to test the very essence of who he was to become. Would he grapple with the shadows of his legacy, or would he rise above them to forge a brighter path? As Jonah and Carter stood on the dimly lit street corner, the gravity of their shared commitment grew palpable, threading its way through Jonah's resolve like a live wire. Strategies swirled in Jonah's mind. Each plan was a revelation, peeling back layers of his own hesitance while exposing a deeper yearning for autonomy. He was a man transformed, standing on the precipice of action. With Carter's insight as their guide, Jonah laid out an ambitious timeline. "We start small," he proposed. "Gather intel, connect with those who are still reeling from Thorne's rule. When the momentum builds, we'll hit harder." His voice resonated with an energy he hadn't known in years, yet unease flickered within him, urging him to consider the implications of every spoken word. Carter's analytical gaze bore into him, assessing the nuances of his plan. "And if your strategy backfires, you think Thorne will play fair? You risk everything by pulling the trigger too soon." Each word was a dark reminder, an unsettling truth that forced Jonah to confront his limits. Doubt crept in, gnawing at his courage. What if he miscalculated? What if it all went south? But beneath that lay a deeper fear, remaining stagnant while Thorne continued to siphon the town's spirit. He couldn't retreat into the shadows any longer. "Let's integrate some grassroots connections," Carter suggested, his voice a low murmur as if they stood on the edge of an abyss. "Look for those who are fed up but scared. You have to gauge loyalty before stirring the pot." The implications stung. Jonah knew he had to sacrificially shed his naivete, to embrace the intricacies of influence and betrayal. He nodded, settling into the gravity of the task. This was no idle fantasy. It was an intricate dance of suspenseful human dynamics, set against a backdrop of emotional stakes. Within, Jonah felt the pulse of looming decisions. But what weighed upon him most were the personal stakes. His father's shadow lingered like a ghost, a reminder of the legacy of failure he sought to escape. Jonah had built walls around his vulnerability, numbing his fear with detachment. Now, crackling with purpose, the question pressed into his psyche. What if that vulnerability was the key to authentic strength? "Carter," Jonah hesitated before continuing, "what if we let them see our wounds, acknowledge why we're fighting? People respond to authenticity." The words felt alien, but they ignited a flicker of determination. Carter snorted, then turned serious. "You think they'll care? They're just trying to survive. Pain is a debt that most are unwilling to revisit." Jonah's anger simmered, but he tempered it, using it as fuel. And yet, pain is the very thing that binds us. The truth is powerful, Carter. If people can relate to why we're squaring off against Thorne, they just might join us. The conversation shifted. Jonah stepped from theoretical discussions into the territory of confronting the personal, battling their own fears, vulnerabilities, and sketches of their past failures. The reckoning with themselves was as daunting, if not more so, than facing Thorne. By the time they wrapped their discussion, the fear of inaction dominated Jonah's thoughts. He understood that hesitation had been his greatest enemy. He needed to catalyze not just a rebellion against an oppressive regime, but also a rebellion against his own self-imposed limitations. As the weight of responsibility pressed upon him, Jonah thought about the first name on their potential contact list. A schoolteacher whose activism had been stifled by Thorne's regime. They would seek her out the following day. Her story might help him bridge the divide between past and future, his fragmented identity and his live, beating ambition for change. But as Jonah headed toward home, a gnawing sensation lingered, a foreboding that the past was not quite as buried as he wished. Would he confront not only an oppressive force threatening his town, but also the lingering ghosts of his family's legacy? He gritted his teeth, already anticipating the confrontation with both Thorne's darkness and the echoes of his own fears. The dawn of their plans shimmered with possibility, but the shadows of doubt hung heavier than ever. Tomorrow he would seek to stir emotion in those who lived in shadows yet yearned for light. Yet within him simmered the question, would embracing vulnerability prove to be a catalyst or a misstep? Had he truly changed, or was the act of laying bare his truths the very risk that could unravel everything? Jonah woke to the early morning light filtering through his window, casting pale patterns on the walls. His mind was a restless swirl of anticipation and dread. The previous night's discussions with Carter echoed in his head, a relentless reminder of the challenges ahead. Today marked the culmination of weeks of internal battles, and another night unfinished business. Uncharted step toward unmaking himself from the remnants of doubt. He shook off the remnants of unease and made his way to the tiny kitchen, the scent of brewing coffee competing with the humid air. Rather than fill his stomach with the comfort of breakfast, he opted for the sharpness of caffeine. Each sip felt like a small act of rebellion against the apathy that had paralyzed him for too long. As he prepared to leave, he grabbed a small notebook where he'd mindfully sketched strategies and obtained snippets of inspiration from his conversations. The playground of paper was now filled with crossed-out ideas and doodles that illustrated his turmoil. One entry caught his eye, a quote he had copied from an article about effective leaders. "Vulnerability is not weakness, it's your greatest strength when wielded wisely." He pondered the implication as he stepped outside. Would his growing desire to expose his vulnerability invite the connection he craved, or undermine his authority as a leader? The sidewalk felt unsteady beneath him, threatened by both hope and fear. Jonah found himself walking with purpose toward the local cafe where he expected to meet the schoolteacher. Her name was Margaret, and her defiance against Thorne had made her a beacon for those yearning for change. He wondered how her past, intertwining with his, might illuminate his own journey toward acceptance. As Jonah entered the cafe, his eyes searched for her among the hastily arranged tables. When he spotted her, a woman in her mid-40s with messy curls and ink-stained fingers, she was hunched over a stack of papers, undoubtedly grading assignments while sipping on her coffee. Despite the casual setting, he sensed a weight to her presence that mirrored his own struggle. "Margaret," he approached, heart racing slightly at the prospect of genuine human connection. She looked up and offered a tentative smile, one that seemed to communicate both caution and curiosity. "Jonah, right?" she replied, gesturing for him to take a seat. He noticed a spark of recognition in her eyes, one that suggested she had heard whispers about his resurgence against Thorne, though clearly not wholly convinced of his intentions. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, scrambling to collect his thoughts. "I think we are at a point where we need to reclaim our voices." She set down her pen and regarded him carefully. "Reclaiming them starts with us embracing our truths, but that's not easy. What have you learned about your truth, Jonah?" Her question caught him off guard. He had prepared a defense of his crusade, but not a dissection of his own inadequacies. Vulnerability tightened around him, like a noose, yet simultaneously, perhaps, a lifeline. "I don't want to just be a voice in the crowd," he started, grappling with the timber of honesty. "I want to show people why this matters, why it matters to me personally." His gaze faltered momentarily, afraid of how she would respond, but he pressed on. "I've realized that if I want to inspire others, I must be willing to expose my failures along with my goals." Margaret's expression softened. "You're on the right path, Jonah, but it can risk your reputation. Vulnerability can be dangerous. It opens you up to criticism and divides." Jonah felt every nerve in his being straining against her words. "But isn't that what we're fighting against? A system that thrives on fear? Shouldn't we model the change we want to see?" The conversation deepened, and for the first time, Jonah felt a flicker of empowerment through shared understanding. Yet he couldn't ignore the shadow lurking behind his thoughts. Would authenticity indeed forge a path to freedom, or was he courting disaster by risking exposure? As they spoke on, Jonah felt the contours of his resolve reshape. He was grasping an essential truth. His path forward required not just strategic planning, but an unwavering commitment to his identity and shared stories, sewn with threads of vulnerability. But he couldn't shake the image of Thorne, that oppressive shadow looming larger with each revelation they shared. The stakes were rising. Would the revelations of truth push them forward, or would they crumble under the very weight they sought to overcome? Jonah left the cafe with a new fire ignited in his spirit, a resolve tougher than before, yet questions clung to him like shadows. A reckoning loomed on the horizon, where truth and strategy would collide. Would his honesty lead to allies standing tall beside him, or expose him to isolation and vulnerability against a merciless opponent? The risk of a misstep echoed in his mind. The pivotal moment was approaching, and Jonah knew he could either step into the light or retreat into darkness. The sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting Silver Creek in shades of amber and crimson. Colors of transformation mirrored the evolution within Jonah McCall. He stood at the edge of town, his heart a whirlwind of resolve and trepidation. His confrontation with Thorne had been forged in the fires of his vulnerability and the stark recognition of who he was and what he stood for. In that moment, he wasn't just the sheriff. He was a man reborn, ready to reclaim his legacy. As he inhaled the crisp evening air, Jonah reflected on the journey that had led him to this point. Days filled with introspection, camaraderie with newfound allies, and a burning desire to purge Silver Creek of its corrosive weight found culmination in a singular feeling, a sense of purpose clearer than ever before. He recalled Margaret's words about embracing truth, recognizing that they were not merely a strategy, but a lifeline to the very soul of Silver Creek. His father's revolver hung heavy on his hip, but it was no longer a burden. Instead, it symbolized the power of choice, the choice to rise against tyranny or shrink back into complacency. With his allies now partially mobilized, Jonah felt they had achieved a level of unity that radiated strength. He turned and strode purposely towards the heart of Silver Creek, the chatter and laughter from the townsfolk filling the air. These were the faces of hope, each one etched with potential, and they deserved a champion ready to fight for justice. As a distinctly familiar figure blocked his path, a twinge of hesitation coursed through him. There stood Carter, weighing his options more heavily than Jonah had suspected. "You ready for this?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "More than ever," Jonah responded, his resolve unwavering. "Word is spreading, and we have a chance to take a stand now." As night enveloped the town, Jonah felt electric energy crackle in the air. He and Carter navigated through small gatherings, reaching out to business owners sleeping under the oppressive weight of Thorne's influence, sharing stories of empowerment and uprising. Each encounter ignited a flicker of hope. Jonah could see their spirits beginning to rise, at least partially unshackled from the chains of fear. "Meet us at the town square tomorrow evening," he said repeatedly, asserting the time and place for a gathering that would enable their community, a grassroots revival. Each emotional connection forged with the townsfolk reconstructed his own sense of purpose, while reinforcing his position in their eyes as a leader rather than simply a law enforcer. That night, Jonah sat in silence, contemplating the weight of the challenge before him. He had walked several roads, facing ghosts of his past and the looming specter of Thorne, and in those decaying shadows he had found light. It wasn't easy admitting his vulnerability, nor was it trivializing his fears. Instead, it strengthened him further, proving that the tides could turn when individuals unite under the banner of truth and shared struggle. Dawn broke with an exhilarating clarity, the commitment swirling in Jonah's heart. He arrived at the town square early, the familiar laid-back vibe replaced with electrifying anticipation. One by one, the townsfolk trickled in, pupils reflecting a mix of curiosity fused with doubt, yet ultimately a willingness to engage. As the sun glistened down on the assembled crowd, Jonah stepped forward, locking eyes with Mary and David, who nodded in support. These were not just moments, this was history unfolding before him. "People of Silver Creek," Jonah began, his voice ringing with newfound authority. "For too long we have stood idle, allowing corruption and greed to dictate our lives. Today we choose to reclaim our narrative, our dignity, and our lives. We are stronger as one, together." His declaration fueled murmurings of agreement that rippled through the crowd, embers of hope igniting before his eyes. Jonah could see their fear melting away and their hearts warming to the call of change. As the crowd swelled, he shared the concrete evidence of Thorne's exploitation and manipulation he'd gathered with Carter and Margaret. He deftly illustrated how their personal stories entwined with the very fabric of Silver Creek's identity. A wave of realization washed over them. These were not just distant individual matters, this was their lives at stake. With each phrase, Jonah felt the walls of doubt crumbling. He realized he was not leading them as a sheriff with authority, but as a fellow townsman fighting for their shared cause. The hope blossomed like wildflowers breaking through barren soil. Then, unexpectedly, the door of power swung open. Thorne's men appeared on the ridge. Their menacing presence sent shivers through the crowd. The threats were pulsing between them like a drumbeat, but Jonah stood unwavering, ready to confront whatever chaos might arise. "Today, we fight not just as individuals, but as a community," he declared, the fervor in his voice nourishing their bravery. "We will be heard." As Jonah stepped into the fray, the whispers of doubt that had lingered over him slowly evaporated. Here, adorned in his vulnerability, he emerged not just as a man reclaiming his town, but a force of nature, confident, recognized, competent, and definitively transformed. In that shared moment, their collective voices erupted like thunder. He had proven the power of genuine connection and truest resolve. As courage enveloped them, the tide began to turn. Silver Creek began to reclaim itself. Tomorrow would mark a new chapter, not just for Jonah, but for every soul in that town. Together sowing the seeds of revolution where once there lay barren ground. He glanced around, binding each heart with his own, knowing that they had achieved something extraordinary. Authentic personal growth and a reimagining of their futures lay ahead. The inevitable conclusion had arrived, not in the shadows of defeat, but in the brilliance of liberation. A renewal forged in authenticity, tenacity, and hope. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. It really makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second.